Hey, I bet you've heard of Joanie Loves Chachi, right?
Of course.
But have you ever actually watched it?
No.
Cool.
So it's the most 70s show made in the 80s about the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm glad we all looked up when it took place.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would never know when it was supposed to take place from watching it.
I like bingo.
Oh.
Although, why is he a California surfer in Chicago?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
I'm desperately trying to understand that. I guess Joanie really does love Chachi.
Yeah.
But Joanie loves Chachi.
That's the difference.
If you're listening to this in summer 2020, when we recorded it, please stay safe, wear your mask, and keep fighting for justice. Now let's find out if Joanie actually loves Chachi. Cold open. We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne.
Aaron Yeger,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
A Radio Gizmo production. So here we are. We're at it once again, talking about a very interesting sitcom. We've taken it back to the 80s this time.
Yeah, we did. It's good to see you guys again. It's nice. We're still distanced, but
Yes.
also a fun note. This is the first episode we've recorded since we've launched.
Yes, this is the first episode that we've actually recorded since we first launched.
So like I said, bringing it back to the 80s, we've got Joanie Loves Chachi. Tell us about it, Aaron.
Okay, well, to understand Joanie Loves Chachi, we must first jump back in time to 1974, when Happy Days began its epic 11-season, 255-episode run as one of the most successful sitcoms of its time. Happy Days was a nostalgic exploration of 1950s America, which is also the era which birthed our modern conception of the teenager and the suburbs where it was set. It was a massive hit. Multiple spin-off shows emerged from Happy Days. Laverne and Shirley was the most successful, and Mork and Mindy, which is loosely connected, did quite well too. Far less successful was Joanie Loves Chachi. It aired on ABC from March 23rd, 1982 to May 24th, 1983. 17 episodes in all. It stars Erin Moran as Joni Cunningham, and the insufferable Scott Baio as Chachi Arcola. Joanie was the younger sister of Richie Cunningham, the lead character played, of course, by Ron Howard. Chachi was Fonzie's cousin, who chases her for years. In Happy Days, they start dating and then leave for Chicago to pursue a music career together, which is the jumping off point for the show we are going to talk about today. Chachi's stepdad, Al, owns the drive-in restaurant in Happy Days, and he and Chachi's mother, Louisa, moved to Chicago to open a restaurant there. In the pilot, a member of Louisa's family in Chicago, I believe her brother, uncle to Chachi, claims to manage musicians and encourages Chachi to put his musical act on stage in his parents' new restaurant. Chachi insists on Joanie being included as his partner in the show, but then once she arrives, he is nothing but jealous and seems incapable of sharing the stage with her, as if it wasn't totally his idea in the first place.
So, Aaron, we watched Joanie Loves Chachi. Why the hell did we do that?
Good question. We started talking about exploring unsuccessful spin-offs, as well as starting to throw 80s shows into the mix, and this definitely ticks both boxes. But for me, one thing I find particularly fascinating about this show is that the title has lingered in popular culture. Many people recognize the phrase Joanie Loves Chachi, but few know much about the show, let alone have seen it. references to the title actually appear in popular culture. Everywhere from a line of dialogue from Rachel Green in the pilot for Friends to the Beastie Boys song Get It Together. Also, this show began the Miller-Boyett Productions dynasty, which would go on to produce many successful sitcoms, including Full House and Family Matters. But for them, this is where it all started. So I had to see and understand.
I noticed the Miller-Boyett, and I was just like, "Oh man, they were already doing it. That's awesome that this was their first show."
But is it awesome? I mean,
it's interesting though, because you're right. Like Joanie Loves Chachi has lingered in the in pop culture for decades past this, and like, it might just go down to the fact is it's a really great title. Like it just pops.
It does pop. It's true.
It's such a great title.
The title pops for sure. One thing that occurred to me, though, after watching a couple episodes of this, is that the title really does foreshadow one of the central problems with the show, for me at least, which is Chachi's massively inflated ego.
Yeah.
And if you think
about... Is that really Joanie saying it, or is that Chachi saying it about Joanie? So she loves me.
But also, if you think about the title, it's not Joanie and Chachi are in love with each other. Putting aside the fact that would be way too long of a title, the title positions him as the central figure to be loved, and her as one of the people who's in his orbit loving him.
Yeah.
So it's still not balanced. The title has a great sound, a great ring to it.
Yeah.
But it does foreshadow that problem.
Yeah. Why wasn't it Chachi Loves Joanie?
Terrible title.
Because he doesn't.
Yeah, that's true. He loves the idea.
He loves the idea
Joanie.
of her.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, just right off the bat, you can kind of tell that the show is centered around just how hot Scott Baio is. And like, that was literally, that was the show.
Yeah.
And like, Scott Baio being a complete piece of shit aside, he's a very good looking man in this. And like, instantly I was like, all right, I see what you're up to here, 1980s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
It's a vehicle for Scott Baio to kiss women.
Yeah.
That's a major part of the show.
That entire decade, really. Like that the entire 80s and 90s were just a vehicle for Scott Baio to mess around. There's lots of data out there to support that he was quite the how do we say this? Like,
you could call this show Scott Baio Smooches.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's also
or
a good title.
Chachi Loves Chachi. Like,
yes.
Chachi does love Chachi.
That might win best hot take on this show.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note, Scott Baio does not show up on Happy Days until like 5 seasons in, right? 3 episodes after Scott Baio shows up on Happy Days, you know what happened?
Fonzie jumps the shark.
Fonzie jumped the shark.
Oh, it's Scott Baio's fault.
It's Scott Baio's fault. He had shark lure around him or something.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the show went on for another 6 seasons.
Yeah.
If anyone out there doesn't know, jumping the shark, that expression is one to describe when a show basically took its ridiculous turn and went into like cheesy and bad territory. And it's actually created because of a plot line where Fonzie in Happy Days literally jumps a shark while he's water skiing or
on his
surfing?
motor.
He's water skiing.
He's water skiing. Yeah.
And he jumps a shark tank.
Jumping the shark means to go down a like bad path as a sitcom.
It's great. He's still wearing his leather jacket, but he's got shorts on.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
He's out in California.
But I'm glad you did the research on that, because I was wondering
had to know. I
where
had to know.
plays into the Happy Days universe relative to the appearance of Chachi, knowing that Chachi's Fonzie's cousin.
So this is like 5 years after that already. And then of course Joanie Loves Chachi failed.
Yeah.
And they all ended up back on Happy Days.
Yeah, they eventually like went back. And the funny thing is,
Just
I was
sad.
reading.
I guess they weren't successful.
Well, no, yeah. And I read and one of the articles I read they quoted Erin Moran saying she didn't even really want to do Joanie Loves Chachi, and she would have been happier just staying
on Happy Days.
On Happy Days.
There are so many moments in
Aw.
this show where it feels like they're telegraphing to the audience as hard as possible. You like Happy Days. This is kind of like Happy Days. Please watch this show. And there's so many moments, including the episode we watched where Fonzie visits, where it really feels like he's just there.
He's shoehorned
to
in.
try to remind viewers, like, by the way, watch this show. Well, look, we'll give you Fonzie for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So that's a common spin-off thing where they don't bring the characters in right off the bat, but when they start struggling a little, they're like, okay, we better get this in. Like Frasier didn't bring in some of the Cheers folks until a little bit later.
Yeah,
not because they were struggling. Frasier was a show that was succeeding, and they were like, maybe now we'll do it. But
Frasier is a great contrast because it's known as generally one of the most, if not the most successful spin-offs, and their little callbacks to things from Cheers don't happen until they do it as like a fun nostalgia moment. It's definitely not to bring in audience. I remember watching Frasier back in the 90s, and when I was young and I first started watching that show, I don't even think I knew it was a spin-off or was connected with Cheers. It just stood on its own 2 feet as its own show.
Frasier does stand on 2 feet, absolutely. Because, I mean, he's the same character, but it's not the same show.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I guess you could say this about Joanie Loves Chachi. It's not Happy Days. It's not. There's an attempt at it being partially a musical, which is, also kind of cashing in on what was popular at the time,
I think it's laudable to try to do the show as partially a musical and actually spend time living in the musical performances. But if you're going to do that,
you better
the
get
music should be
it's
good. And
I
it should
mean,
be, if they were going to make a show set in the early 60s, they should have committed to the music sounding like it was the early 60s. There, I said it.
I'm glad you did, because that's a common problem, because I know we've already been discussing this about how it just is not a 60s show.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It drives me crazy.
This was a common thing with Happy Days spin-offs where they wanted to do spin-offs, but they didn't necessarily want to be tied to the show's, aesthetics from the 50s and 60s. To the point where, so Mork and Mindy Mork and Mindy is a spin-off of Happy Days in that there's an episode where Mork from Mork shows up. The character was such a big hit that, they spun him off. Not even the character, just Robin Williams, basically. And they had to explain it away as it was all a dream, because that doesn't fit in a Happy Days thing. And then so Mork and Mindy comes around in 78, whereas the episode that he's ostensibly shows up in would have been the late 50s or the 60s, and they had to explain that he came back to Earth 20 years later. Because they were like, we don't want this to be a period show. There's only so much 50s set design Robin Williams can chew.
Unfortunately, with this show, while they could have kept it more ambiguous and just glossed over it, they did make certain choices, including an episode called Beatlemania, where they very deliberately point out the year and era that it takes place.
Yeah.
And yet the clothing and the music just screams 70s, and in some cases
70s, early 80s.
even into the time when the show was made in 82.
Yeah, Scott Baio's outfits are contemporary for when it was made, not period pieces.
It drives me crazy. I will argue, though, that of Happy Days spin-offs, Laverne and Shirley seems more accurate to the time period. Laverne and Shirley takes place in the late 50s, early 60s. And they all Laverne wears her amazing little cardigans with the L embroidered, and she has the bouffant hair, which was very era appropriate and for her, her particular style. It was all very good, and Lenny and Squiggy are greasers, so it's kind of. I think that they do a great job with capturing that time period.
It's because they embrace it.
Yeah, they embrace it.
This show runs from it.
Yeah, this show runs from it big time, and it's really sad because that's such a cool. The premise of it is something that would be so interesting to watch. Watch a couple of young aspiring pop singers to really make it in that very specific era.
In love and trying to make it as singers.
They could have made Joni very much like a Leslie Gore type or a Petula Clark type, you know, with big bouffant hair that's like a big hairsprayed helmet and like wearing the cute little fit and flare dresses and singing in that particular pop style. But they didn't. They had her very much be a 1983 hot girl singing torch songs with her very 1983 hairstyle, with her like curly, like short mullet thing happening. And she you know, it's very frustrating. And then obviously Scott Baio looks more like he's right out of Saturday Night Fever than the kind of crooner type that he actually would be in the early 60s. Like he would be some sort of, you know, Paul Anka type or a, you know.
Not to mention he can't sing.
If he's like singing in an Italian restaurant, wouldn't he get dressed up in a full suit and tie like a Frankie Valli? Like, wouldn't he, you know? And that is still the type of people that teenage girls freaked out over. Like, if you see old footage of like Paul Anka singing, like girls went bananas. But for whatever reason, they just couldn't help themselves but to present Scott Baio and Aaron Moran in a way that was so contemporary at the time, because they were just like, oh, I need to get that young audience. Like, we need to get early 80s teens watching this thing. And there's no way in hell that they're going to be able to watch it if they're not styled like contemporary teenagers.
It's definitely, they were selling a product here. They were definitely selling a product.
And the music as well is so, like, it's produced, like the melody of the music could very much be translated to early 60s, but the instrumentation and the production and everything is
well,
so
I was trying to
time.
put my finger on what the theme song reminded me of.
So of the time of the show, the early 80s.
And you had an idea, Brynn, what the theme song reminds us of.
Yeah.
What was it again? It was Lionel Richie or something?
The song like Endless Love.
Endless Love.
Like Endless Love, yeah.
It's like this weird,
thank you.
It's like this weird, like late 70s, early 80s torch song. They're singing to each other, and there's like these, like the lighting, you know, like there's like that little moment where they're singing together with the microphones.
They're silhouetted.
Yeah. It's just, it's so
and
70s.
Yet it takes place in the Happy Days universe, where they have episodes that cross over, and it takes place deliberately in the early 60s.
Like, if you watch any footage of singers in the early 60s, they're not like holding a mic like that, really. Like, they kind of are, but I mean, for the most part, they're kind of like swaying to like a mic on a stand, and it's still
there's a
like,
different stage presence. There's a
different stage presence. Like you know, it's like it's all the details of it are just like very confusing and very weird.
Speaking of stage, so Barry, you like to talk about sets and production design in sitcoms. So I had a couple thoughts that I'm going to pose as questions to you. One has to do with the choices they made in terms of the depth and physical space of the set.
They make a lot of choices on these sets.
They make a lot of big choices, and it feels like we're still trapped in this world where it's a 3-camera sitcom, and the cameras are between the set and the audience. So the cameras are in a certain physical position, and they're always trying, sometimes struggling, to reach into deep corners of the stage in a way that not only does it not seem era appropriate in the style of camera work, but it also feels like it's a little bit awkward, some of the camera moves.
You're switching basically between 3-camera setups and then basically switching to a 1-camera setup for the musical performance, where like I'm kind of wondering if maybe when they were doing the musical performances, they were blocking the sets and not having a studio audience. Probably and not necessarily even to like, well, A, maybe to block how bad it was, but B, like just to block, maybe not to do it that much, just to, you know, that's the kind of thing you probably wouldn't want to really do with a full audience there. So I kind of felt like they were blocking the sets and shooting those 1 camera. Cause you were right. There are a lot of handhelds, which you don't see in sitcoms barely ever, really.
Yeah.
And I found that really weird. And then like when you're switching between them and you're not really switching your lighting setups, it gets really weird.
That's the other thing, that it doesn't have the traditional high key lighting all the way through that you expect. So sometimes the camera moves into a position where you're going to get shadows that don't work for a sitcom.
Yeah.
And it feels weird.
I noticed that.
And then the other thing is, I mean, this has more to do with the perceived apparatus of the show. But if we think of the idea of a fourth wall, and not only chipping away at the fourth wall by seeing the physical camera movements of a handheld camera, this came out a lot, especially in the second episode we watched where Fonzie visits. And we'll talk more later about Fonzie. But there's a moment where I even caught that one of the characters retook the start of one of their lines.
Yeah, because Howard Cunningham did, right? The guy who plays...
Maybe that's what it was.
The father. Yeah.
Because
he restarted because of the laughter.
Big cheer from the audience, standing ovation, getting to see one of their favorite characters, and then restarts the line.
Took it again.
And
loved it. Loved it.
So
that's some sitcom magic there.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I kind of enjoy those moments where you catch a glimpse of the apparatus. But on the other hand, it felt like they were specifically trying to do that, where anytime an actor would appear for the first time in an episode, they would really pace it out to give time for that big welcome back to the show moment.
Man, did I love that, because not in a serious way, but like it really gave you like this thing of just how big Happy Days was.
Yeah.
Seriously, you're cheering for that character from Happy Days? Like they
People
treat
went bananas.
They treat every character from Happy Days that shows up like they're the fonts. Like, really, you're that excited to see Joanie's parents? Like, you're that excited to start on the Cunninghams? Like, oh my god!
It sounds like the audience is losing their minds over every appearance.
Or Al. Like Al. So Al is, Al's like the second owner of the diner. Like he's not even Pat Morita. He's Pat Morita had already left, then Al came on, and then Pat Morita came back, I think.
The thing I'm finding confusing as well, like there's a lot of things I'm confused about in this show. But what was the reason? I understand that Louisa and Al got married. Okay, so they got married, like Chachi's mom married Al, but why did they move to Chicago? Like, what was it that made, is it because she wanted to be closer to his family?
I think the implication might be they wanted to open a restaurant and her family has money.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
I think the restaurant, I think it's sort of implied, is bankrolled by that family there.
Okay, that makes sense, because in those opening scenes, there's all this pressure for them to meet the family and meet the...
This might just be one of those times where I'm looking deeper into something that just isn't there.
That just isn't there, yeah. But they make certain things so clear, but not others. Like they make it so, they hammer it over the head that they live above the restaurant. Like that's referenced so many times.
They reference that so much. Like, just so you know, this is where they physically live. And the whole time I'm thinking, I don't care where they live. I just want to know
why.
Why?
Like, why did they open this restaurant? They had a successful business in Wisconsin.
Why did they move from Milwaukee?
Uncle Rico goes to Al and he says, "You should have live music. I've got a great band for you." And then Al says, "No, Chachi's gonna sing." And Uncle Rico still thinks Chachi's a kid.
He's a little kid, and then he's
so
like,
then he turns around, he
hot.
sees he's hot, and then he instantly offers to be the manager.
It's so funny how conveniently Uncle Rico has an interest in managing bands, and conveniently Rico's two children. It's convenient, but it's kind of entertaining that his two very blasé children end up being the backup band, and they can actually play, and they're good.
The show paints Rico as much more of a big shot than he is, because like he's really just trying to get his kids a job there.
Yeah,
He's talking big.
Yeah, he's talking big
with his handwritten business cards.
His handwritten business cards.
Here's my business card. Yeah, it's handwritten. Yeah, I know. I got 14 of them. It's my favorite line in the entire episode.
Yeah, it's good.
Love it.
Yeah, he has his two children, Mario and Annette, who
are great.
They are very funny, actually. I feel like the best performances come from the supporting characters in this. The little side characters. So Mario and Annette, he introduces to Chachi, and he's like, they're going to be your backing band. Oh, and we also have this guy, our drummer, Bingo. And Bingo is also very funny.
Bingo's great.
Yeah, we love Bingo. But Bingo's kind of random and out of place because he's basically like a weird, like flaky.
Well, he's a Southern California
Yeah.
surfer dude
wearing a like Hawaiian shirt.
wearing clothing.
But it's
and,
Chicago.
Yeah, clothing and hair that you would not see in Chicago in the early 60s, but you might see in Southern California in the late 60s.
On the other hand, the characters do treat him as an oddity. Like,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They treat him as an oddity, but he does kind of feel like a good character from a different show.
Yeah.
which makes him a good character on this show because he's a nice breath of fresh air. He's so stupid. As soon as you see him, like you're like, this is gonna be terrible. And then like every line is
But
just
he's lovable.
gold.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what does that say about how we feel about the rest of the show?
Yeah.
That he's
That
able
we're-
to steal those moments so easily.
We're hyper focused on the side characters because we don't.
I also like that they don't overdo him ever. It's like they
Right.
seem to know that he works in these little
moments.
bits, right? So we watched 2 episodes. We watched the pilot, and then we watched the season premiere of season 2. It's not really a retool or anything done. Like, it still seems to be kind of chugging along the same lines.
Yeah. Just picks up where it left off, and
It picks up where it left off. The only thing is, they bring in Fonzie to, I would have assumed, to drum up the ratings, but apparently the ratings were, like, pretty good until they moved it. And then the ratings were terrible.
I hate to say it, and this does not represent a comment on the Fonzie character per se, but the moment when he appears in this show does once again represent this show jumping the shark.
It reminds me of like when Homer is doing like drop-ins on shows after he bowls the perfect game.
Yeah. Yeah. Did somebody say the perfect game? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a shoehorned in moment that you're just like,
he's completely irrelevant to the plot of the episode until later, like into this episode 1 of season 2, until like the one of the last scenes where he has to fake playing with their band because they do this whole pretense of being a family band so that they can be a part of this TV showcase.
yeah.
And then they joke that like Fonzie is the father of the band.
Yeah. But
And
that's
it's
exactly right. He doesn't appear so much to drum up ratings because they were doing fine in the first 4 episodes. It's more like just an odd choice that was made and had a reverse
they needed an
effect.
excuse to bring in Fonzie.
Let's bounce back to talking a little bit more about Chachi, because this show centers so heavily around Chachi and his swollen ego, I suppose. And off the top of the pilot, he's pushing hard for Joanie to be joining him on stage as a musical duo, but he seems highly incapable of actually sharing the stage with her without a tremendous amount of jealousy. And then a lot of the plot lines between the two of them in the episodes that we've seen deal with him reacting to how she dresses, to other men being around, just generally being controlling and possessive and jealous. But at the same time, there are moments where they're clearly giving him like little sweet, charming moments, and it wavers back and forth between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were little moments, little beats that really charmed me. Like, for example, all the shots of them, like this is in the opening number, and there's like beats of it at the end of the episodes where they're just sitting in the empty restaurant, and all the chairs are overturned, and either Chachi's playing at the piano by himself, and then she comes and joins him. It's very romantic. It's like, these are dreamers. Like it's like that moment where they're just like, oh, these young people who just want to do something in this world, and they're in love, and it's like there's something very romantic about it. They're just there alone in this restaurant, and they're dreaming about the future and what could be. There's little moments between them where, like in the pilot, there's this nice little bit where they're talking about how, it's like so hard for us to be together here. We're fighting. Why are we fighting? And they're talking about their relationship and how, it's different now because they're navigating their romantic relationship as adults.
Yeah.
He says something to the effect of, "Oh, our biggest problem when we were back in Wisconsin was whether to go to the movies or go bowling, and now it's just different." And that's sweet. Like there's like that exploration of first teenage love versus like an adult relationship. And it's like that's very nice, and I'm glad to see that presented. But then it's kind of like ruined by his kind of like sexist like possession over her
and that scene, which has a really sweet aspect to it, like you just described, also feels like it's the conclusion of a different episode rather than the rest of the plot that we've seen leading up to that, because there's a dramatic conflict building up between the two of them in terms of being able to share the stage and his jealousy. And there are moments where she seems mad at him, or at least very frustrated. And it builds up to this point where you think there's going to be a breakthrough, and whether it's an apology or some sort of understanding or moment of growth.
Chachi does not apologize.
But not only that, it feels as soon as we launch into this scene that they are talking about their relationship in a way that is in some ways sweet, but feels like it's out of a different plot line.
Yeah, it's a rewrite. It's a rewrite to make the end of the episode a little sweeter.
Yeah, and then make them more sympathetic.
And it helps.
It does, because we kind of forget what a jerk he was. You know, like it's wild that the first half of the episode is, you know, Chachi's trying to convince his Uncle Rico that Joanie absolutely needs to be on stage with him. You know, she's so talented. She's this, she's that. And then when Rico meets her, he's like, oh, like she's too uptight. She's too much of a goody two shoes, which I don't see any evidence of. But, you know,
she wears gloves. She wears
little white gloves. So
little white gloves.
Yeah,
come on.
She's too much of a priss. And then she gets on stage finally, and she's in this like what looks like a figure skating outfit. Like it's
an early 80s figure skating outfit.
It's very era inappropriate. Because I
mean,
like this...
I think Tessa Virtue wore that at the Olympics last time.
Yeah. It's like this weird, like it's this high neck little mini dress that's like very sparkly, and you know, everyone's like treating it like it's the skimpiest, most scandalous outfit ever. And I'm like, it's fine. It's like
it's short, but that's it.
But that's
her first outfit is like has a real deep cut.
Yeah.
So it's like there's way more. Yeah.
The outfit that she's shamed for being too goody in is like a low cut top.
It's more revealing than
she looks great in it.
Yeah. And it's like she gets up in this little getup and does her dance number, and she just performs well, and Chachi is so offended and just thinks he like slut shames her, like essentially, and is like, you put on something decent and da 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 da. And it's like there's like a lot of shaming. She's shamed for being too quote unquote goody, and then she's shamed for being too scandalous.
Okay, let's talk about the fact that he literally kisses a random girl in the audience
after his first performance.
Square on the mouth, an extended deep kiss with someone he doesn't know. But she's so scandalous. She's swooning over these women at this table.
And she's like, hey, I get it. It's fine. Whatever. Let's move on. And then she puts on a dress, and he's like,
and he
what?
loses his mind.
Yeah. Loses it.
After his first performance, he's working the audience like you would think he's this big celebrity with these swooning fans. Like it's Mick Jagger at his peak popularity.
And a lot better looking than Mick Jagger.
Perhaps. But there are these young women in the audience who are just losing their minds for him, touching him and kissing him. And that's apparently all totally fine. And you can just brush that off. And she wears a sparkly dress, and he just can't get over it.
He can't handle it.
But it's funny talking about all this because it's almost like men are terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to that, doesn't it? You know, it all comes back to that. There's just the general misogynist undertones of this show, like many shows from that era and from the current era even. There's like lots of emphasis on the women's bodies. In the pilot, Uncle Rico makes kind of blatant comments about how Joanie needs to show off her figure. And when Joanie's parents arrive in the episode, you know, he makes a comment about Mrs. Cunningham's figure. And in the other episode that we watched, which was season 2, episode 1, there's all these jokes about Annette, the other bandmate and Chachi's cousin, about her body, but in a negative way. And she's very much an average, you know, looking girl, but they're like fat shaming her.
And also with Annette, I thought she was great. Like I thought from a comedic acting standpoint, I thought she was great and an underutilized part of the show.
Yeah.
And I it really bothered me that when she would make an appearance, it would often just be a setup for a payoff that involves some sort of fat shaming or some sort of
with the brother character fat shaming her,
the brother doing it. And then we watched a bit of the Beatlemania episode just to see the context of how they thought this music might align with the British invasion or whatever. And there's even worse instances of her being used in that way, where it's not even just a line of dialogue that another character says, but they've introduced all sorts of moments where she's randomly eating junk food and things like that.
So from the moment in the episode, the second episode that we watched where they fat shame her, it did not feel like a first moment. It felt like they had been doing this for the other 3 episodes in between there that we hadn't seen. Because I was like, why are they all of a sudden like harping on this girl's weight? Like, what is going on here? And it really felt like it was a reoccurring bit. And I was just like, oh, that's got to be a terrible part of this show. I did like that, like, at least Chachi is like, no, you look great. You look beautiful. Shut up.
But it is too bad because I feel like there could have been so much more out of her character. She is funny. Like as an actor, her deliveries were funny.
It's just your typical philosophy of, okay, so the female characters are either sexualized or or slut shamed, or they're body shamed. Like if they're not the ones being sexualized, they're being shamed for their appearance, and the way to make them feel better is to tell them, oh no, you look great. It's like, who cares about that?
As if they need to hear that from you.
She's in a rock band. She's cool. Like she doesn't even there needs to be no emphasis on her appearance whatsoever. And she's a funny character. Like, but they have to wedge that in.
I got the impression that the other character is probably somebody who is quite hateable. The brother character.
Mario?
Yeah. Because like the other two make me laugh, but he seems to just exist to say terrible things.
Yeah.
Also, an interesting to note. I can't remember the last time I saw a show that objectified a man quite as much as this show does. Like this show
it's true.
is
they
like
do. They do it as much to Chachi. Yeah.
At every turn, more.
Yeah.
At every turn.
Yeah.
Like Chachi is like, actually, people are like, this guy's hot. And like his family members are saying it. Like,
everyone thinks he's an irresistible presence.
Yeah.
One of my notes here is that it seems like the show was just a Scott Baio kissing vehicle. In the episode where Fonzie appears, they're auditioning for some sort of TV appearance, and Joanie is really nervous, which makes sense. Why wouldn't she be nervous? It seems like circumstances where they would be nervous, and Chachi solves the problem with the power of his kissing.
Oh, that moment's really cute though. I don't even want to knock that
it's
moment.
Cute.
I bought into that moment.
Well, it may be cute taken on its own, but in the grand scheme of the show, it feels like he solves problems with kissing the same way that Fonzie solves problems with snapping his fingers.
Yeah.
Or kicking something.
Which as we learned in this episode has become quite a problem for his lifestyle, and he just wants anything to give back his powers. I really enjoyed that bit too, especially that it occurred on this show and not on Happy Days, but him commenting on the fact that every time he snaps his finger, a girl seems to come into his arms, and he's in a happy relationship. He is not looking for this anymore.
It's the Kavorka.
He's got the Kavorka for sure. Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was just like there's a whole reoccurring bit in the second episode with Fonzie where like Fonzie is handed a trombone and he just cannot for the life of him figure out how to play it. And like Henry Winkler plays every moment for everything it's worth. And like he keeps finding new bits to do with this fucking trombone. And I was just like, it instantly, for like the rest of the episode, I've been kind of like rolling my eyes at Fonzie, and like this, where I was like, I get it. I get why Henry Winkler was as big as he was then, because like the little bits of physical comedy he finds in just being handed a trombone, I was just like, oh my God, this guy's great. Like modern me loves Henry Winkler, but you know, it's mostly, you know, for like his appearance in like, you know, Arrested Development or in Scream, or, you know, like,
oh my God. And he's so good in Barry. He is so good in Barry.
Or as you guys have said, in Barry. Yeah. Like
he really is. And as
so
much
incredible.
as we joked about the Fonzie character being inserted into this show in an awkward way or shoehorned in there, Henry Winkler is there to work. He's putting in the effort.
Yeah, he's great. He's just great. I don't know what makes Fonzie work, but somehow he does.
Yeah.
He's a contradiction, but he's enjoyable.
One other scene that I thought was a weird contradiction in the flow of the plot was in the pilot, where some random guy in the restaurant is trying to put the moves on Joanie. And
you mean Tad?
And Chachi comes over to presumably like protect her from his advances, and you know, he asks the guy to step outside for a fight, basically, and the three of them go outside. Something happens that we don't see, and they come back in, and accidentally he has punched Joanie in the face because she tried to step in between them. So putting aside the implications of him punching Joanie for a moment, although
the pilot of their show,
the very next scene, so he just tried to solve a problem by punching someone. And in the very next scene, where there's the whole dispute between the parents and Rico over Rico's potential management of their musical act, Chachi tries to stop Joanie's dad from intervening through physical fighting, and says that nobody solves any problems with punching, or you can't solve problems with punching. And they don't play it for irony.
Joanie rolls her eyes and says, "Tell me about it."
No, she says, "Tell me about it." But the show launches past that moment without the traditional reaction time or camera cut to suggest that it recognizes the irony of him trying to solve a problem with punching and then tell someone else to not do that.
And here's how you make that scene better. Rico throws a punch
and hits
Chachi gets in the middle and gets punched in the face. And then when they're kissing at the end, both of their faces hurt.
Yeah, that would have been so much better.
Show.
So much better.
But was it like Scott Baio couldn't be like, oh, I can't be seen punched? Like
call me 1982 sitcom writers.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll punch up those pilots for you.
You're so right. And
I thought the fact that Joanie got punched by accident was like, oh, woman, don't step in and have an opinion and get involved.
See, here's what I love about that, is that such a common sitcom trope, or just TV show trope, where like somebody's fighting, and then the girl jumps in the way and gets punched in the face. It's always played way darker than this. Like, it's always played like, holy shit, this guy's violent.
Yeah.
There's like an episode of Boy Meets World, I think, where like Sean accidentally punches his girlfriend, and like it happens to show that the man is being like irrationally violent. This show is like, it's fine.
It's fine.
She's fine. You should put some ice on it. You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, this show reacts way too lightly to that moment.
Why weren't her parents enraged? Why weren't her parents like...
They are. They freak out.
Yeah, they freak out a little. But they don't like blame it on They don't say like Chachi's manhandling. Like, I would jump to that conclusion. If I were her mother, I'd be like, you son of a bitch. We're taking you back to Wisconsin. But I guess they do that, don't they?
We've talked a bit in the past about the idea of a version of this show that does work. If the singing, specifically, if Scott Baio could sing at the level of even the level Aaron Moran could sing, but like at a high enough level to warrant spending 5 minutes an episode listening to them sing.
The music's fine. It could be good. That if it was good, that would make a better
version of this show that works is where the musical performances are a little bit better everything's a little bit more era appropriate. And to the point that Brynn made earlier, that these sweet romantic moments guide the plots a lot better.
Yeah.
Rather than being momentary detours from otherwise confusing storylines and contradicting plot points, to just focus more on that young, ambitious, loving relationship and them trying to make it as musicians.
And I don't know. Like, I don't think they had a vision of where this was going. They did not think ahead. I was like thinking just myself as you were saying that all of this. I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like it ended with like Joanie becoming the big star and he leaves him behind, and like, that would have been a cool way to end this thing if it had gone on.
Yeah.
And like,
this show was not made with genuine intentions.
No.
It was
just
a
like,
package put together.
Capitalize
Yeah.
on horny teenagers wanting to watch.
Yeah.
A couple of hot people.
It was let's throw what we can at it and hope it works.
Yeah. And even though Chachi is a new element in the world of the Chicago music scene or restaurant scene, everyone is behaving as if he's already a big star.
Yeah.
So like the people in that restaurant are behaving the way the audience of the show is behaving.
I would be so upset if I just went to have a nice restaurant or like a nice meal at a restaurant, and out of nowhere, some fucking 18-year-old guy with this huge ego starts crooning his way through the dining room, kissing random women. I would be furious. I'd still tip 15%, but it wouldn't be but that's just because that's how you do. Yeah, that's the minimal amount.
I just want to eat some calamari and some fucking pasta. And we got this like young douchebag up here.
Oh, I just remembered the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which was what performance works this way. And this is a very TV thing, but like you sing one song, takes a 20-minute break, sings another song, another comes back a couple hours later. Like, this is not how performances work.
There's no way they're selling food.
No, like
there's no
literally
food on the tables.
We see the first performance in real time, and then he goes, "Thanks, we'll be right back in a couple of minutes," and you're just like, you just got there.
Yeah,
you just got there.
I want to know how the lasagna is. You know,
I didn't see a single plate of food on any of those tables. And then Al comes in at the end and he's just like, "We had another great night." I'm like, I don't think that's you, man. I think this is just for Chachi.
This whole restaurant is just a vehicle for Chachi, the same way that this TV show is a vehicle for Chachi.
Every character is just there to revolve around Chachi. In the pilot, it's way more evident, but like they don't have a scene together really until that last scene. Like Joanie and Chachi are kind of at odds the whole episode and kind of in their own plots. Maybe that's why that scene at the end kind of works, because you're like, oh, I get it. These characters are in love, not just like sharing a title.
So Brynn, our first 6 episodes were from the 90s, but now that we're going back to the early 80s, 6 Degrees of Friends might be a little more challenging. What do you have for us?
It wasn't that challenging, actually, and my theory is still very sound that if it's within a couple of decades of the show Friends, there's gonna be some solid connections. Joanie Loves Chachi is separated from Friends by 2 degrees.
Not bad.
And it's
not bad.
You guys will really appreciate the specific connection, because it's such a random connection.
Go on.
Okay, so there's 2 different levels. So there's 2 separate 2-degree connections, and then there's 1 3-degree connection. Ellen Travolta, who plays Luisa Del Vecchio, Chachi's mom. And also Ellen Travolta is John Travolta's sister, interestingly enough. She guest starred on The Single Guy, the short-lived 90s sitcom, which we're definitely doing. We're doing that, The Single Guy. And one of the stars of The Single Guy was Jessica, and I'm going to butcher this. It was like Hecht, which is her Hecht I don't know. And Jessica famously had a reoccurring role as Susan on Friends.
Oh, yes, of course.
So she played
That's-
Susan on
Wow.
Friends, the wife of Carol, who was Ross's ex-wife. The second 2 Degrees is actually the same connection. Winifred Friedman, who played Annette Mastorelli, Chachi's cousin and bandmate, guest starred also on The Single Guy. So there's 2 ways that it's randomly connected to The Single Guy. Then, of course, I was like, okay, I'm doing it loosely through secondary characters and through guest stars, so I have to connect one of the main players. Like I had to. So I was like, I gotta connect Scott Baio. Scott Baio connects Joanie Loves Chachi to Friends through 3 Degrees. So Scott Baio, who is of course Chachi, plays Bob Blah Blah on Arrested Development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah. So Arrested Development, of course, starred Jason Bateman. Jason Bateman starred in 4 movies with Jennifer Aniston. So Jason Basement.
Jason Basement.
Jason Bateman starred in The Switch, Horrible Bosses 2, and Office Christmas Party with Jennifer Aniston. And Jennifer Aniston, of course, was Rachel Green on Friends.
So let's do the spin-off. Where did some of the cast members of Joanie Loves Chachi end up after?
Well, I mean, we already mentioned Ellen Travolta and Winifred Friedman. They both did a bunch of TV. They both continued to work solidly. Our Joanie, Erin Moran, unfortunately didn't go on to do very much. She was on The Love Boat for about 5 seasons, which was a solid run. But after that, she kind of fell out of the spotlight and fell on some tough times. And eventually she passed away back in 2017 from cancer. Scott Baio, of course, is probably the most successful. He went on to work on several shows. We know him best probably from Charles in Charge. He was Charles, and he was in charge of their days and their nights.
And our nights.
Yeah. He also went on to be in Diagnosis Murder for several seasons in the 90s. And he had his role in Arrested Development, and he's still working. I mean, and this part doesn't count, but he went on to be a real mouthpiece for some problematic political and social views on things. He's an outspoken Trump supporter, and has some other problematic behavior that people are welcome to research on their own.
Problematic behavior that dates all the way back to Happy Days.
Yeah.
He's pretty talented, though. I'll give him that.
This is, of course, our opinion, but people are welcome to check it out on their own and just see what kind of gems he's said. It'd be foolish not to mention the Miller-Boyette dynasty, which started with Joanie Loves Chachi. They, of course, went on to produce many, many successful sitcoms, including Perfect Strangers, Family Matters, Full House, and Step by Step. And also, fun sidebar, that sparked a pretty funny collaboration between them and composer Jesse Frederick, who did all of the theme songs to those shows that are very iconic.
Oh.
So Jesse Frederick did not do Joanie Loves Chachi. So maybe that's why it was not successful.
So wait, are you saying that of all of the shows they did, the one where music is the most critical central portion of the show's concept is the one that they didn't work with the composer who went on to do all of their other shows?
Yeah. I feel like we could do a whole episode on Jesse Frederick because it's the most iconic 80s and 90s theme songs that we all still remember and sing along to.
Barry, how do you feel about pitching this show?
The real sad fact is nobody pitched this show. That's how I feel about a pitch on this one. I could definitely pitch it. I feel like I would pitch it as a teenage girl. Daddy?
Yes?
Why is Scott Baio only on my television for 7 minutes a week?
I don't know, dear.
Daddy put him on television for 22 minutes a week and have him sing and dance and kiss girls.
It's either this or I buy you the pony.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit younger now because I'm a producer in the 80s.
that makes sense. I'm also a younger network executive.
I've got a great idea for a show for you.
Okay, shoot.
All right, let me just check these notes here. All right, so you know this Scott Baio guy?
Yeah.
He's a real hunk. He's a hunk. The kids love him. I've got some notes written down here. Scott Baio, he could be on television for 22 minutes a week. Why is he only on television for 7 minutes a week? He's such a fox. He's a hottie. His hair is dreamy. I just want to run my fingers through his hair. It just goes on like that. Those are the notes that I've got here.
Was this your idea?
These are my daughter's notes. I'm kind of in the doghouse with Tammy. It was either this or buy her a pony.
So why not just buy the pony?
Do you know how much those things eat? Make the show.
All right, what do I care? This was great. We had a lot of laughs, but some things are no laughing matter. What did we all learn from Joanie Loves Chachi?
Well, we learned that Joanie really does love Chachi, but not more than Chachi loves Chachi.
And cut to credits. That Was a Show is a production of Radio Gizmo. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram for info about upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends about it.
Next time on That Was a Show.
This is post Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think it's post Born in East LA. But
He gets a prestigious and Cheech Marin credit.
Ah.
yeah.
This kitchen makes no sense, though.
This kitchen is a redress set from something else.
Yeah.
This was a living room set. There's so much floor space and like one stove in a commercial kitchen. It makes no sense.
I love the look of that hotel too. All the pink and the rattan. It's like my shit. I love it so much.
I'm starting a slut count, by the way. I'm counting the amount of slut jokes they do.
Yeah.
It's 3.
It's actually 4.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you guys notice the cameo in episode, I think it was 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack Black. Radio Gizmo.